Yeah, hello. Welcome, everybody. This is Alex, and I'm Bettina. We're both journalists from Austria, as you've already heard. And we actually really met on a bus in Vienna. And we're really excited to be here. And we're going to talk about robots and coding and how data is changing the newsrooms all over the world, actually. So let's get right started. I want to take you a bit on a time travel. So journalism used to be very handcrafted, very lo-fi. It was a quite closed and gated community. And the job of a journalist basically consisted of talking to people, gathering quotes, and then typing away like Clark Kent here. But this is actually changing. So nowadays, newsrooms are more like looking more like this. And here you actually see a picture of a hackathon. And here are journalists cooperating and working together with coders and people from the civic tech community. So this is kind of how journalism is changing, becoming more open, more collaborative, and more technology-driven.
Sorry.
And before we go deeper in this topic, a little bit more about us. Alex working for netzpolitik.org. I work for Wiener Zeitung, as you heard, a newspaper in Vienna. And we both did research. We were journalism fellows at the Reuters Institute in Oxford, at the University of Oxford in 2017. Alex's paper was on robots. He was putting Europe's robots on the map. And I wrote a paper about data journalism in small newsroom. It's called Bigger is Not Always Better, what we can learn about data journalism from small newsrooms. And you can download the whole paper at the Reuters Institute site. But maybe a bit of the background why I decided to write this and do study on that. I also work for a small newsroom myself. Wiener Zeitung is not big. We're maximum 80 people or so. And it's actually the oldest newspaper of the world that's still being published, founded 1703. You see one of the early papers here. And you can imagine it's quite a traditional newsroom. And data journalism is not the priority yet, but I kind of wanted to prove that even if you're small and you don't have resources like the New York Times, you still can do data journalism. So a little background about data journalism, it's a term that's quite trendy right now, but it's actually nothing new. There's just a huge amount of data right now. You probably know all of this. There's more access nowadays and faster ways of processing data, and really a lot of free, easy-to-use tools for journalists out there. And I personally think that it's becoming more important to explain stories based on data, because the trust in media is quite low these days, and if you have data, you can really prove evidence. And you can open the data also for the readers. But actually, many people asked me when I did this study, what actually is data journalism, especially the personal surrounding, like friends and family had no idea, couldn't really think of what this could be. So I gave them some examples, and I tried to kind of, I don't want to say personalize the examples. So this is a database done by Correctiv. It's a non-profit investigative outlet here in Berlin. And you can type in the name of your doctor or the postcode, and it will tell you whether this doctor received money from the pharma industry. So I played around a bit with it, and I actually found out that my really good friend's husband received some money, and she was one of the people who asked me, what is data journalism? So I sent her the link saying, okay, this is the money he got, and this is data journalism. And she was really interested. The other example I want to give is done by Berliner Morgenpost, also here in Berlin, and they're really impressive in terms of what small newsrooms can do in data journalism. And they kind of made a sound installation of how the SPD, the Social Democrats, are performing in the polls. Maybe you can click, Alex.
How do you do this?
Here. Here, yeah. Okay, we don't have any sound.
Can we get some sound? Yes?
very quiet. But yeah, so I sent this to my friend who just joined the SPD. Probably destroyed some illusions in all of those cases. Also in this case, I sent this to my father, who's a real tennis fan, and there's a huge story done by BuzzFeed in cooperation with BBC about Spielmanipulation, how matches are being fixed in professional tennis. And it was a 15-month investigation, and they analyzed data of 26,000 matches. And the code kind of helped to explain that this is really happening. And yeah, so this is an example of big newsrooms, but the other ones were small newsrooms. And I was really interested, how are they doing this? How are the news outlets working together? And I talked to a bunch of people at different big and small newsrooms. You probably know all of them to the right side. The ones on the left are rather small ones. And Berliner Morgenpost-Korrektiv, I already mentioned, are also rather small. And I did interviews, and my main findings were that most of them, regardless of the size of the newsroom, work in teams. And usually the team was between 6 and 7 people. And it was a team of mixed skilled people, so coders, designers, data journalists, sometimes more on the data side, sometimes more on the journalism side, and kind of could show you don't have to be big, a big newsroom, you can still start small with a team that's doing that. And a question I often get is whether every journalist needs to know how to code. I would say no, but I think it definitely helps you to get a job because the field is still growing. There are a lot of job opportunities for data journalists. And I think everybody, even if you're more a traditional writing journalist, you should know what's possible and who to talk to and who you can cooperate with. So this is a big thing, and this will be coming more. So even competing news outlets are cooperating these days. And yeah, now I will hand the word to Alex, who's going to give you some good examples about robot journalism.
Great. Thanks so much, Bettina. Well, let me say a few words about how I come to this topic. So, for 6 years, I was journalist at the Austrian Press Agency. It's a small and kind of national news agency, and I was doing all kinds of stories there. I was at the foreign desk, but I was working night shifts and day shifts and weekend shifts, and I was writing stories about finance, about local events. I was writing about sports, and very often I was thinking, do I really know what I'm doing here? And you know, as I think every journalist who's working asks himself sometimes. So, and I was also thinking, very often what we do is very kind of fly-by-wire. You have a template, you stick the numbers in. You know, can a robot do that? Is there not an easier way to do that? And so in 2017, when I went to Oxford, I just looked at what all the other news agencies in Europe are doing in this respect. And I tried to get a picture of, you know, what is cool, what is out there. So I found that there's loads of automation in journalism already going on. And I think many of you have already read a story written by software you just haven't realized. So I thought it was really cool. I did the research, I wrote a paper about it. And then I thought it would be really cool to do robot journalism myself. So I got some funding from Google, and I went to NZZ in Switzerland, where I tried to produce some automation myself with the help of a programmer. And I tried to do that for 3 months, and now I can call myself a failed app developer, I think. Anyways, I went back to being a journalist, but I'm still writing about robot journalism. I'm you know, trying to stay abreast with the field, and I think I'm just going to show you some cool examples to, you know, show what is actually out there already. So this is a story by the Associated Press. Associated Press is one of the world's largest news agencies. For those of you who are not in journalism, news agencies just play such a central role in journalism because they kind of provide basic information, and you find a story by the Associated Press might pop up on any of 10 or 20,000 news websites across the world. So this is taken from a small local paper, but it's a story about ExxonMobil, the oil giant, and this was written by software. It's what the software does, and you can see the figures I put in orange. This comes directly from a file sheet. This comes directly from the financial reporting. This is something the company that is listed on the stock market has to report every quarter. So AP automated their quarterly earnings report stories. So they used to cover 300 companies each year. Now they cover 4,000, almost 4,000 companies each year. So they produce, literally thousands of stories on company earnings reports every year. And they also started to automate their sports coverage. So leagues, minor league baseball, something that they couldn't cover before with human reporters, they are now doing by software. And this is a pattern that goes throughout. So news agencies will say, is there something we haven't covered before? Things that we can't cover because it's local or too specialized. They will use automation to produce stories on that. This is an example by the Norwegian news agency. I put this in there because I find it quite interesting. It's a very small news agency. They don't have a lot of resources, but for those of you who don't read Norwegian, I also made an English translation for that. So this is a local sports story, and NTB did this last year, and they automated much of their football coverage. And there's 20,000 league games played in Norway each year, and they are now able to cover every single one of those games if they want to. And what you can see here, what I find really cool, is that what I put in orange again. This is there is data interpretation in that, so it's not just software sticking numbers into a template, but it's also it goes through all the sports statistics of the year, or maybe even some years back, and it gives you some kind of interpretation. It says it's 3 matches in a row. It says this one striker has scored 14 goals this year already. So you're seeing more of these examples where the automation provides insights and already puts the insights into words. So this is really something that human reporters also do. And this story, this kind of stories, what I found also is that the most news agencies just put them out. So it's no human is looking over them anymore. They just pop out the story, and this might be on a website just within seconds of the game ending. So it's also about speed. This is an example from Great Britain. So Press Association is also very old, very venerable news agency, and they've been around for more than 150 years. Just just in the last couple of months, they started to automate local coverage. So what they did is they said, well, there's all these large government data sets. So can we kind of generate stories for that? And what they do is they take those data sets, and this is an example on childhood obesity, and they said, well, can we, in the past, they would have written one story for all of the UK saying, this is going on with childhood obesity. Now they take this data set and they produce local stories for each and every paper they have as customers. So what they did here is, this is pretty much the way that the machine wrote it, and it's front page material for the Cambridge Independent. There's another example, the Norwich Evening News. The headline, this is about recycling. The headline has probably been written by a human, but the story hasn't. So what you can already see is this kind of automation making it possible for news agents to incredibly scale the amount of content, the amount of stories they put out. And you also find that politicians will be reacting to stories written by machines. They will, sometimes this is the start of a discussion about something that wouldn't have been the case otherwise. And just let me walk you through some of the findings I had in my paper. So by July last year, when I put out the paper, I found that 7 out of 15 news agencies are now using automation, some form of automation, that is. So I have to say that especially in the German-speaking countries, you don't find as much of that as in Northern European countries and English-speaking countries. Since then, 2 more have started to work on automation projects, so this is really taking off. The main areas have so far been finance and sports, but now you see examples, news agents saying, can we provide election coverage? Can we do what PA does, write statistic stories? My colleagues at the news agency would, say, but this is just about to replace journalists, this is just going to kill jobs. And I don't think that is true. That is not what I found when I spoke with all these news agencies. So I think what we're seeing is that automation is a way to provide a very basic story, maybe a first take on a story. It's not going to be the in-depth kind of reporting that you want, but it's possible to scale content and to mass produce a take on any data set in a journalistic way. I also found that automated content is not always clearly labeled. So the Associated Press stories, they put a sentence after every story saying this was produced with the help of Automated Insights, the company that provided the software for them. But many of the smaller news agencies don't do that. So a lot of the automated stories you wouldn't know they are. Also it's very interesting about the data. This is maybe something we can discuss later, that it very often comes from third-party sources. So journalistic organizations don't have much control over how this gets produced. But I'd say the rise of the robots has only just begun. And let me just quickly mention a couple of the ethical implications I find very interesting with this. So whatever the robot writes, this is limited to the data set that is there. So any need for further contextualizing the data, for saying what this actually means, that is something that the robot can't do. So obviously, human reporters will still be very valuable, even for providing further context for stories written by software. And the question of the data is something that hasn't been covered enough yet. So the Norwegian press agency gets the data from the Norwegian Football Association, but that also means that they're dependent on them to some extent. So for me, the question is, when news organizations start to automate their content, is what is their relationship to the provider of the data? And I found that only really those kind of hardcore financial news providers like Bloomberg and Reuters are able to collect their own data, whereas most other news organizations don't have the resources to do that. Which brings me to the final point where I'm trying to draw together what Bettina and me said, is I think that robots and data journalism have really opened up new fields of work for journalists. Journalism is becoming more technology-driven. I mean, it used to be very artisanal, very handcrafted, but now you find that you can do a lot of cool things, provide value to your readers, to your viewers in many different ways. And automation in particular can also really help to scale reporting and to provide local content, to provide specialized content that general news organizations couldn't do before. It also requires a more diverse skill set in the newsroom, as Bettina said. There's going to be more coders, there's going to be more graphic designers, there's going to be more people doing that kind of thing. So the question we would like to fire back at you is, what does this mean for journalism? What kind of things are you seeing out there that you would like discussed, and what new paths does technology and especially data open for journalism? And we'd like to turn this over to you guys. So the floor is open.
You talked about the side of data journalism where the data is not what is made by the robot, but the robot synthesizes the message.
Yes.
Yeah, but we are on the edge of machine learning and artificial intelligence and stuff like that, and so we are not too far away from situations where robots are actually capable of collecting data, of interpreting reality and putting it into some data sets. And I think this is one of the points where it gets interesting as well as dangerous.
I absolutely agree. But I think what we're seeing is that the question for me is, are news organizations going to do that? Because usually they don't have the resources. You know, if I can find a large news organization that is able to field 3 coders to do any project, that's already much. So I think that very often journalism will take cues from the technology sector, and I don't know. I don't think if anyone is going to produce something that is close to artificial intelligence, I'm not sure it's going to be a media organization.
I think it's not up to them to produce it, but to use the artificial intelligence that is already out there. I don't know if you know IBM Watson, for example.
Yeah.
Everybody could use that. You just have to say what it should do, what it should get out of what kind of data, information, basic, rough data. And I think we will see that within years, that robots are just scanning and crawling the internet looking for news. And you were talking about that the most expensive point in that data journalism is collecting the data itself.
Yeah.
And therefore, many of the data journalism we see today uses data from other sources. And one method to reduce the cost of the data is to collect it automatically. And that's what artificial intelligence is doing. And therefore, I think there will be news agencies within years who will start to do that. And
I'd be hopeful for that. I think that could really be something that drives down costs and makes more journalism possible with less resources. But I'm just very skeptical that we're going to see that in, like, you know, maybe not next year, maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10. It's very unclear, the timeline for that. So a lot of the development that is going on right now that we see is more about producing stuff from data sets than producing data sets. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Haluka. I'm actually working as a data journalist, news developer for NZZ. And I was wondering, with your research, did you find cases where actually, like, there was some kind of hybrid robot journalism, so that, like, the robot maybe gathered, like, first insights and then the journalist took that story to the next level? Because the examples that you describe is like somebody could just argue, like, well, it's great to have, like, a report on every, like, local football game, but then again, is it really that worth? Is it like, okay, wouldn't the same information also get to the reader if they just looked at a table and looked at a couple of statistics? Because basically, from what I understood, that's how they field the stories. It's like, okay, basically a lot of sentences with, like, spaces in between, and then you just put a number in there. And, well, like, I'm exaggerating,
no.
But there is the question of, like, okay, do we, like, does automation actually benefit, or would it, like, in the past we would have just said, okay, we don't have enough resources and that's a boring story, so we don't write it in the first place. So are we actually producing a lot of content where the question becomes, do we actually need to do that, and do readers care about that?
That is a very good question. I think that's absolutely the approach that you can see in Reuters, for instance, as, you know, a very large news agency. That they talk about the cybernetic newsroom. So what they're saying is that automation is, you know, they do a lot of, like, one-line snaps, like one-line stories. But very often they use automation just to generate a lead. So they have a new cool software that they're trialing right now, where the software will give them just a line. So something interesting is going on in the stock market. So it might say this stock has risen just at an unbelievably high rate this morning. And this is something where the human can pick off, you know, saying, what does this mean? But we as humans, we have difficulty sometimes with putting figures, you know, getting figures into our heads. So even something that might give a brief interpretation or put figures in words might help human reporters build on that. And I think they do a lot of more stories where they enrich a quick template-generated story with quotes and interpretation. That is more the Reuters approach. I think the Associated Press is more pushing out short stories for local customers where they really don't interfere anymore with the content.
Hi, this question is probably more for you because you talked about data journalism in small newsrooms. So, I mean, if you analyze a big data set and you don't omit the correct variables, you get very different results than if you omit the variables you should. So I was wondering, like in the Trump election, no one got it right besides 538 because they, didn't analyze the data right. So how can a journalist work around the danger of getting a very different result because you don't know how to work the data set?
Well, if one individual journalist doesn't know how to get it right, is that?
I'm saying when you have a data set, you sometimes don't know which variables also have an influence on that. That's why none of the other newspapers besides 538 got it right because they didn't, look deep enough what could influence the data.
I guess it's always good to cooperate with people, like not do it by yourself. In even the BuzzFeed case, I think I showed you, I didn't explain, they were working with statistic professors. So usually it's not only coders. Even then, you should really have many eyes look over it. Yeah.
And that's also something that I think is found in news agencies is that they might, have two people less typing those short quarterly earnings report stories, but they might have two new people that do data integrity and mind the data set, and so it's also a shift.
Okay. We have time for one more question, sir.
Yeah.
Or
anyone
input?
Here who?
Any opinions on that?
Dare not speak his name.
Another one.
Great.
With the news, you often have newspapers collecting information from other newspapers or TV stations or whatever. And when thinking of data journalism, we can get into a situation where automated processes take data who is synthesized by other automated processes, and we get a kind of feedback loop thing. Did you get in stuff like that, or do you know examples for things like that happening?
There's something that I found really intriguing, and I should have said this earlier, I think. So when the Associated Press started putting out those quarterly earnings report stories in 2014, you had people from, I think, the University of Berkeley looking at that, and just looking at how, so they were starting to cover a lot smaller companies, right? So they were saying every company that has more than $100 million returns is being covered now. So they put out these stories, and people who looked at the stock market saw that these companies suddenly got more trading volume. So you have journalism, like this kind of automated content influencing the level of trading. At the same time, we all know that in the stock markets, increasingly machines are being used to trade. So are we getting closer to a point where the journalism is automated, the financial journalism is being automated, but at the same time the trading is also being automated? Are those two things reinforcing each other? I think that there's not really a clear answer to that, but that could be very intriguing to look at in the future.
Okay.
Well, we have time for one more question, or we have time for a warm applause for Bettina and Alexander.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Great to have you.